Hey y'all, it's Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis here in the middle of September, and I am with Fred Clarke once again. And as always, I appreciate you coming on and chatting with me. And today we're going to talk about fall and winter care of Catasetums and, of course, their allies, the Cycnices, Morbides, Cloaceas, and heck, let's just throw Galleandras in there and all their hybrids. Um, but anyway, Fred, I've had you on a bunch of times. Do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself and then we'll jump right into it?
Well, all right. So I'm Fred Clarke. This is Sunset Valley Orchids. This is the business that I run. Been doing it quite a while now. I started growing orchids when I was 18. So it's like 40 some plus years that I've been growing orchids. I started growing Catasetums though about 25, 30 years ago or so. So I've got a lot of experience growing those. I grew them back in the day when they weren't that popular. They were kind of a novelty, and only a few hardcore, really dedicated, adventurous growers were growing them. And so that's kind of what got me interested in them. But they were different and they were challenging, and there was a lot to learn about them. And I shortly after that discovered that it's one of the best genuses you could possibly have due to the genetic diversity and all the opportunities that you can develop in breeding them. So here we are.
Yeah, before we jump into it, I want to ask you about your greenhouse and what stage your plants are in. But I think I got my first plant in the Catasetum Alliance. I can't remember if it was from you or from H&R when I lived in Hawaii back in 2005. And I thought I was pretty adventurous for growing them. Back then, I would imagine for you there was. I mean, who did you look towards for cultural advice, or where did you even get
Yeah.
them back then?
Yeah, there was really only one firm that supplied those, and it was a company called JEM Orchids, a gentleman named Jean Monnier. He's been retired for some time now, but he had an interesting offering of Catasetuni, and he was the place to go and get your plants. And Gene was a nice guy. I got to go to Florida on some business trips, and lo and behold, I was close enough to his nursery that, a short drive, and I could go see the hotbed of Catasetuni in the world at the time. And so he got me started on the path, and then of course, you dig out all the other little hobby growers and growers that have a few Catasetums in their collections, and then goes from there.
Yeah, not to get too sidetracked, but Gene moved to the Big Island when I lived out there, and I actually was able to track him down and check out his little Macnut farm.
Yeah.
Early on in my Catasetum growing career too. It was really cool.
Yeah, he really liked semi-tropical fruits, right? That was one of his passions. And at his place in Florida, he had all kinds of different things there. It was always fun to check out his orchard.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What do you have going on in your greenhouse right now? What stage of growth are your plants in? Just generally, obviously you have a lot, so it's kind of hard to generalize. But I
Yeah.
know here in Texas we have a couple months at least left of the growing season. Is it the same for you?
Yeah, so here in California, we have cool springs, unlike the rest of the country. And so our catasetums take a while to get going. And so I would say I am at although we're noticing the days are getting shorter, right? You get up, it's darker, and you're going to bed and it's darker. The Our plants, I would say, are in full growth. This is for the month of September, and usually maybe the first week of October, I'm using full feed level, which would be 100 ppm of nitrogen, or the equivalent of one teaspoon per gallon. And we're watering twice, maybe 3 times a week to try to push the plants as much as we can while we still have warm weather and long days. I expect, though, that by the time we get into the second week of October, we'll be backing off on the fertilization because the plants will be reaching maturity, and we'll start to slowly decrease the frequency of watering. We'll probably go to watering once a week in the month of October. By the time we get to November, it'll probably be every 2 weeks. By the end of November and 1st of December, it might be every 3 weeks. And then our last watering would be sometime around Christmas. So it's coming quick. It's
Yeah.
always it's a fun time of year with your catasetums. They've grown so fast, and it always blows you away how quickly they fill out and how fast they size up, and then they go to sleep about just as fast as they come awake. So
Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely an interesting life cycle that's fun to play with and to grow, and then you just throw them in a corner for 3 or 4 months, which is great.
yeah,
Um, so so that's a good summary of what you've got going on right now, and that's pretty similar to actually pretty similar to stuff that I grow as well,
hmm
which actually quite a bit of comes from your greenhouses. Um, you know, some of the questions that I get is quite often actually, and probably you as well, is asking about the differences between mature plants and young plants, in terms of how to prepare for winter, and then what actually happens to them during winter, and how best to care for them.
yeah. That's always a good question, and I appreciate you asking that. So the best way to answer it is in nature, regardless of the age of the plant growing on the side of the tree, with the mature catasetums and the adolescent and the baby catasetums, they all get the same treatment in nature, right? The end of season comes, the dry season comes, it all happens all at the same time, regardless of your age. And so in my collection, I do recognize that you can fool your plants a little bit. And so on my plants that came from Flask this spring, the plug tray plants, I have that area where I can keep it a little warmer coming into the fall
Hmm.
and get maybe an extra, not too much, but maybe an extra month out of growth. If you lengthen the fall, then plants wake up later in the spring. And so there's a give and take there, but I will keep my plug trays about 10 degrees warmer through the month of October, and maybe a little bit into November, than I would my mature plants. Uh, uh, yeah. And so, because those I want to get them to bed, so they wake up early. So I have plants in the spring, and so it's a little bit of give and take. But the thing that I find is that I'd like to get my plants in plug trays as big as possible before they go dormant, so they overwinter better and have lots of energy and storage coming out in the spring. So
Well,
I can
that's an
possibly,
interesting trick that I wasn't aware of. I've never heard of that. Keeping your little ones, and yours, and so for little ones, just to be clear in the definition, that's the ones that came out of Flask this year.
first year plants from Flask. Yeah. So right now they came out in about April or March. So it's, they're 6 months, 8 months old right now. And so we'll grow them for about another 2 months in that warmer condition. And they do, and just the plants from Flask size up quickly, like plants, that you would buy from me in a 3-inch pot. You should be doubling the size of the growth in the next season when you get those, easily, maybe even tripling it if you've got your culture down pat. And so just having a little bigger plant is just, I don't know, having bigger plants is good for me, but it's also good for my customers. You want to get the biggest plant your money can pay for.
Yeah, absolutely. And if a plant's going to go dormant for weeks or months, however long that particular species or cross requires, having big storage organs full of nutrients and moisture, I guess is certainly a
It's
benefit.
helpful.
So
Yeah,
yeah, that
definitely
makes a lot of
helpful.
sense.
Yeah. Right. And you learn this, so I've been, so you've been around the block a bit, right, in life. And so I have learned this lesson, because if you take your catasetums out too late, if you take them out of Flask like in July, you don't get enough growth to overwinter them. And uh, so the key is to get your stuff out early, and that's when I offer Flash for sale, is always in the early spring, so you can get them out and get some size on them before winter hits, and they don't size up enough to over to survive the dormancy. So
Yeah.
it's important. It's important detail if you're growing plants from Flask.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, a lot of us Catasetum growers and other orchid genera, we're like we mentioned, we're still thick in the growing season, but in the coming weeks and months, we're going to start to see a lot of those dormancy, I don't know, signs, I guess.
Hmm.
What what can a grower do to prepare the plant for winter, and then in winter, what is a grower going to do? I think a lot of us, have heard that you're supposed to just stop water and that's it, basically until they wake up. And I've seen some emails coming out for you where you add a little, let's say, jar of water below the plants to kind of
Mhm.
keep the humidity elevated. Can you
Mhm.
talk about the
Yeah,
importance of elevated humidity and maybe watering every now and then?
yeah. So Catasetums in winter, right? Ah. So what happens is that in nature, the rainy season is in the summer months. And the rainy season eventually comes to an end. And so as the days begin to shorten, the rainy season lessens, there's less frequency of rainfall. When it's not rainy out, it's usually not so cloudy out. And so the temperature streams between day and night are more extreme, and the night temperatures are cooler. So uh, the maturing plant, sensing the short days, lack of moisture and nutrients, and the cooler temperatures are the triggers that tell your plant that, hey, the end of summer's here. It's time to harden off and get ready for that dormant rest you're going to have. Now, there catasetums grow in all kinds of environments. There's Amazonian types, there's some that grow with walk-in, but all of them have a wetter period and a drier period. And some are, and in most cases, all plants respond well to stopping water in the late winter. Um, you hear stories about people, oh, I continue to water and stuff, but you never get to see their plants that they're talking about. You only listen to what they're saying. And so some folks have the benefit of living where it's humid in winter. And usually if you live in a humid environment in the winter months, your catasetums overwinter just fine. But if you live where you have the heat on and it's freezing outside and you have 3 months of very low relative humidity, that's a hard environment for a catasetum plant to survive in. And so a number of entrepreneurial growers up in Canada, actually, in Edmonton, Canada,
Oh,
nonetheless. That's cold up. If you want to know where cold is, it's cold at Edmonton.
yeah.
And they came up with this idea where they would take the pot and they would fit it so it fits tightly in the rim of a jar, and in the bottom of the jar had a couple inches of water. And what that water did was create a high relative humidity around the root system in the pot, even though the outside air or moving around the plant was 10 or whatever it is, 15% humidity. And so it worked wonderful. And so they shared some photos with me, and I've shared with others about that. And a lot of people who are having trouble overwintering their plants have switched to this method and have had great results. You don't water the plant during dormancy, but it's like you've seen those humidity trays that people use where they fill a tray with some water and gravel and you put your plant on top. This is just a spin of that idea, but it focuses the humidity on the plant so it can't blow away, or it has to go up through the root system, and it's been quite effective.
That is interesting. There's there's a Facebook group of some very dedicated growers actually in Germany. It's a German Facebook group, and it's very interesting. And it seems like folks just generally way up north could really benefit from that. But I guess to kind of expand that a little bit more, I guess you could, if you had a grow tent or a greenhouse, you could do that. And I
Yeah.
assume that's what you do for your collection, which is way too large to individually treat with jars.
Yeah, so generally we have low humidity here in Southern California, and it doesn't rain a lot. For us, 10 inches of rain is, that's a lot of rain this year. So in my greenhouse, I just let the plants be, and we'll have not 10 or 15%, but usually the humidity will be 20 to 25% in the winter months. And most of all the species that I grow from all the different environments that I collect, all the cycnoches and the catasetums and the marmotes and the galliandras and all that stuff are all in the same greenhouse together. And occasionally you get a plant that doesn't like it or something happens. But generally, if you can have humidity, I think around 25, 30, 40% in the winter, your plants are they're gonna handle that just fine.
And you mentioned all the different plants that grow in different areas. Uh, I had Francisco Miranda on not too long ago. Of course, he described denticulatum, and so he kind of recounted his the times when he was in the Amazon describing it, and he went through some of the habitat, and it's just so different than the big denticulatum's a kind of a smaller species, but and he was saying it's a very different habitat than, let's say, the areas in the Caatinga or the Cerrado, where there's just bone dry conditions for many, many months. Are you changing your culture at all between the different groups, or no?
No, not at all. So I have, probably 50 denticulatum plants. Another plant that grows in close proximity to denticulatum is tigrinum. Probably got 50 tigrinum plants. There's also ceroides, have a bunch of those, and a number of other things that are all Amazonia based, and they get all the same treatment. And I don't have, I'd say I have no problem growing them. I think the plants are pretty tough. You probably, if you wanted to make an exception and manage that individual species or those two species in your collection differently and water them a little more, it might be okay. I can't speak to that because I've never done that. However, I have plants that I've had for decades now, growing under the same environmental conditions that I described year after year after year, and they're doing just fine, right? They're big, giant plants now.
And is that true for the Cycnices, the Mormides? I remember last time we
So,
chatted.
well, last time, so when I was in Costa Rica a couple of years ago, the Costa Rican guy said Marmotes can really benefit from a little irrigation while they're dormant. And so, okay, so you got to, you can listen to a guy, you don't want to ignore their input without, a good analytical review. And so on my Marmotes this year, or in the last year and the year before, when the Marmotes bloom when they're dormant, usually when the plants are leafless. Most, not all. Some of the Mexican Marmotes are blooming right now, but a lot of the Central American, South American bloom late season when they're leafless. And so I water about maybe once every 3 weeks into about maybe into through January. So that's about 3 or 4 extra waterings on the Marmotes. And I have all my Marmotes species and hybrids grouped together, so they're easy to manage that way. They're not mixed in with everything. And so I know right where my Marmotes are. And so it's very easy to water those independently. Now, when I do water them, it's got to be a hot, sunny day. I do it first thing in the morning, and so the plants dry out as soon as possible. And usually they're quite dry when I'm watering them. And so the sphagnum moss is very repellent of water when it's bone dry. And so usually the water just shoots right through the pot, and there's really not any saturation of the moss getting wet and water soaked like moss can be when you're, and so it's really more of like wetting the roots, let it shoot through the media, wet the roots, and it seems to help keep the bulbs more hydrated and a little fuller, plumper during that winter time, that January time.
And you mentioned it being important to water on those warm days. So I guess that's kind of a key if you're gonna water your Catasetums. Ideally, they're dry again during dormancy pretty quickly afterwards, and maybe you want to do it on those warmer, sunnier days. Is that true for the whole group?
Yeah, if you were going to, I don't. But if you were to water your catasetums in the middle of winter, and if you're growing in moss, remember the moss is not going to accept the water. It's just going to run right through the pot.
Yeah.
And so don't fool yourself into thinking that they didn't get watered, because the roots are still very hydroscopic, and they're going to pick up any water that get on them during that time. I'd just be cautious about watering. Remember, in the winter, especially, look at, you live in Texas. I live in Southern California. A lot of guys live up north, and the days are short, and it's dark, and it's gray, and it's cold, and so if you're watering, you want to be careful that you don't, get the plants too wet and encourage some bulb rot. The best technique is to keep the humidity up.
Mm,
Now, watering the plants like that is, how do you keep humidity up around your plants? Well, through watering. That's how one technique to use to keep humidity up is watering of your environment, and then that helps raise your humidity around the plant. So in the middle of winter, you just have to be cautious if you're going to be watering, so you don't end up with a waterlogged, soaked plant, and you have the wet roots for days on end, which isn't normal in the winter for catasetums.
and we've mentioned heat a bunch of times. What about on the flip side, on the cool side? What are some of the things that you want to avoid? What are some of the temperatures you want to avoid? And I assume, when I grow and I talk about growing plants, it's better if your plants are going to experience cold weather, it's better to have dry roots. And I assume this is
That's right.
especially true for your
Yeah, wet,
collection.
yeah, wet and cold is not a good idea for almost any orchid, unless you're growing cool growing orchids. But you wouldn't want to have wet cold catasetums. You wouldn't want to have wet cold cattleyas either. And so you want to make sure you're keeping an eye on the weather and timing your irrigation to match. One of the things that's easy to do is, you water and then it's rainy for 2, 3, 4 days, and now your root system is staying wet way too long. So in nature, catasetums are epiphytes, just like a lot of orchids are. They live on the sides of trees. So how well drained is the side of a tree? And so, you can't deny that. And how long have catasetums been living on the sides of trees in nature? 10 million years or something like that. And so,
Yeah.
your roots get wet and they dry out fast. That's how they evolve. That's how they want to be. And so if you do something that's contrary to that, and you have a wet, sodden root system for a long period of time, that's not a healthy condition for your plant.
Yeah. Um, and one last question before we sort of jump into some tricky dormancy questions that I get quite a bit is when is it best to repot?
Hmm. Well, you hear a lot of people talking about repotting, and I like to repot with the onset of new growth. Now, this isn't true for all orchids. We're talking about Catasetum ivy alliance. So Catasetum, Cycnoches, Marmotis, Cloecias, Galliandras, all that stuff. Some orchids, that's not the right time. But with all those Catasetini, the onset of the new growth is indicative that new roots will follow soon. And so when you see the new growth, it also helps you know how to orient the plant in its new pot to give the maximum amount of space for that new growth to develop. If you were to repot before you saw a new growth, you'd be guessing on where that new growth would emerge, and you might position the plant incorrectly in its new home without knowing which direction it's going to grow. So I usually wait till the spring, right when this new growth starts, but before roots come out, because you hate to damage a new root if you don't have to. And so it's busy around here in the early spring.
Yeah.
Is you're busy with a lot of stuff, and now you got to do all your catasetums too.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I guess, everything we've talked about is pretty much what happens in a standard growth cycle. Plant wakes up in the spring, let's say, and then grows well into September, early October, like you said, and then pleasantly goes to sleep for a while. But the fact is that doesn't always happen. Sometimes a plant drops its leaves, like right now. What should a grower do if their leaves are 3-4 weeks early.
Hmm. Well, we see that occurring in Florida, particularly because it's the summer or spring starts earlier there. And most growers in Florida, for example, see their Catasetum sprouting in February and March. And so when the plants reach maturity and they start to feel the shortening days, they'll abscess their leaves, right? They'll drop their leaves and they'll go dormant. When the day length reaches the adequate number of days and the temperature and the so forth, and the plant starts to grow, then you just let the plant do what it wants to do. Where sometimes people run into trouble are indoor growers. And if you're not diligent about backing off on your irrigation frequency starting in late October and November, and it's warm in the house, hopefully your house isn't too much colder than I don't know, 68 degrees at night, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to warm up to 70 or something in the day, 72. That's pretty good growing conditions. And then if the plants are being grown under lights and you don't adjust the day length of the lights, and so if you keep watering, you keep the day length the same, and it's warm, the catasetum doesn't receive those environmental triggers that it would in nature to tell it to go dormant. And so I get a lot of those questions too, that, oh, in Christmas time, my plant's still in full growth.
Mm-hmm.
And, then you dig in deeper and then you find out, okay, yeah, all right. I didn't understand how early I needed to start telling the plant that the end of the growing season was coming, backing off on the watering, the fertilization, shortening the day length on your light system, and giving some cooler conditions for the plants to all help trigger them into the dormancy state.
Yeah,
You
and
want
for
them, sorry, one last thing, and you
yeah,
want them to go dormant then, so they wake up in the spring, so they got a long growing season in the summer, so they give you lots of flowers and during the summer and
yeah,
fall.
and for everyone growing under lights, I found that it's very easy. The first day of every month is when you sort of evaluate your lights, and this time of year, I set the lights back 1 hour, and
Mm-hmm.
then by the time we get to January, I let it stay at about a 10-hour long day for 2 months. And then on the first of the month, I crank up my lights 1 hour
Yeah.
every month. Then we stop. I think I have 14-hour days, July and August. So it's a real easy, just
Mm-hmm.
get into a habit the first day of every month, evaluate what you want to do with the lights, and that helps all your genera of orchids,
All
really.
your
Yeah.
orchids evolved on this planet. This planet is rotating on its axis and orbiting the sun. I can tell you that plants are highly sensitive to day length, and in the spring when it gets longer and in the fall when it gets shorter. These very important chemical signals are received and produced by the plants under those conditions. Now, there is an exception if you only grew equatorial plants. Then you just put the lights on 12 hours a day and night, year round. And so, but most people don't. The
Yeah, and
Yeah,
most of the plants we grow are not from the equator. They're
that's
from,
right. They're from the tropics. That's
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Hmm.
for sure.
So a 3 to 4 hour change between summer and winter is really good. I would say what you're doing is exactly what I would be telling people to do as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Fred, I really appreciate you sort of guiding us through the second half of the year. We chatted not too long ago about the first half of the year, and maybe how that's the trickiest half, because that includes spring. Um, but we are trying to grow our plants, trying to get them prepared so that when they wake up in spring, they have a great growing season. And of course, that translates into a great blooming season. So I appreciate these tips and tricks, and I know I've learned a couple of things already as well. Is there anything else that you want to mention before we wrap up?
Well, just grow catasetums, you guys. They're one of the most rewarding plants. They're designed for hobbyists. They're designed for folks just like us. They're not your grandmother's orchid. These are something that's totally cool. And with the breeding that we've been doing, we've been breaking new ground and developing new things that have never before seen in the history of orchid growing. And so being part of that as a collector and a hobbyist that's good stuff, man. You can't go wrong with that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and it is cool to see that just just the sheer number of really cool species and hybrids and different mormides and cycnices and all this stuff. It's a great time to be a Catasetum grower for sure.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, as always, it's good to chat, and
Yeah,
I'll
thank
chat
you
again soon.
much. All righty. Okay, see you later.